In 1873, a trail cook named Charlie Goodnight bolted a chuck box to the back of an old army wagon and changed how America ate forever. One pot, one fire, one man feeding 12 hungry cowboys after 16 hours in the saddle. No measuring cups, no recipes written down, just instinct, salt pork, and whatever the wagon carried. Number 14 on this list was the meal cowboys begged for on Sunday nights, and number 3 was so filling that one bowl could carry a man through a blizzard. These dishes were built for exactly the situation millions of seniors find themselves in today. Cooking for one. Tight budget, tired hands, no energy for a sink full of dishes. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because these 25 forgotten cowboy meals might be the simplest, cheapest suppers you ever put on your table. Let's count them down. Number 25th, son of a gun stew. Every trail cook had his own version, and every cowboy swore his outfit made it best. The base was simple: beef, onions, potatoes, and whatever organ meat the cook had on hand after a fresh kill, all simmered slow in one cast iron pot until the kitchen, or in their case the prairie, smelled like Sunday. For a senior cooking alone today, the modern version skips the offal. Brown half a pound of stew beef, toss in one diced onion, 2 potatoes, a carrot, and cover with water and a pinch of salt. Let it bubble for an hour while you read the paper. One pot, 1 spoon. 3 days of leftovers from a meal that cost about $4. The cowboys called it son of a gun because they could not agree what was in it. You will call it the easiest supper you have made all week. Number 24, cowboy beans. Pinto beans were the backbone of every chuck wagon from Texas to Montana. A trail cook would set a pot soaking the night before, then simmer it all the next day with a chunk of salt pork, an onion, and a few dried chilies. By supper time, the beans had thickened into something halfway between soup and stew, rich enough to stick to a working man's ribs. For a senior, a single bag of dried pintos costs about $1.50 and feeds you for a week. Drop them in a slow cooker with bacon, onion, garlic, and water. Walk away. Come back to a pot that smells like 1880. Beans this good cost less per serving than a cup of coffee. Number 23rd, Trail Drive chili. Long before chili came in cans, it came out of a chuck wagon. The original was nothing like what you find in a Wendy's cup. Cowboys browned beef chunks, not ground meat, then stewed them with dried red chilies, cumin, garlic, and a splash of strong coffee. That coffee was the secret. It deepened the color and added a smoky bitterness that balanced the heat. A senior can make a small batch in a single Dutch oven in under an hour. Use half a pound of chuck, a handful of chili powder, 1 onion, 1 can of tomatoes, and a tablespoon of leftover morning coffee. 3 bowls for 3 nights. No second pan needed. Number 22, pot roast, chuck wagon style. When a steer went down on the trail, the cook had to use everything fast. The toughest cuts went into a deep cast iron pot with onions, wild garlic, and a little vinegar to tenderize. Buried in coals for 4 hours, the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. Today, a single chuck roast from the grocery store runs about $8 and feeds one senior for nearly a week. Sear it, drop it in a slow cooker with onions, carrots, potatoes, and a splash of cider vinegar, and forget about it until supper. The cowboys knew what we forgot. Cheap meat, slow heat, 1 pot. That's the whole secret. Number 21, bacon and bean soup, hearty bacon and bean breakfast soup. On cold mornings, trail cooks stretched last night's bean pot into breakfast by adding water, more bacon, and a handful of cornmeal to thicken. The result was something between a soup and a porridge, hot enough to thaw frozen fingers. For seniors today, This is the perfect use for leftover beans sitting in the fridge. Add a cup of broth, 2 strips of chopped bacon, a tablespoon of cornmeal, and warm it slow. 5 minutes of work for a meal that costs pennies and warms you from the inside out. Number 20. Cowboy hash. When the wagon was running low and payday was still a week away, the cook scraped together whatever was left. Cold potatoes from yesterday, a little leftover beef, an onion, all chopped fine and fried hard in bacon grease until the bottom turned brown and crispy. That crispy bottom was the prize. Cowboys fought over it. For a senior with leftovers to use up, this is your meal. 1 skillet, 1 spatula, 10 minutes. Crack an egg on top if you want to feel fancy. Nothing in the fridge gets wasted, and nothing sits in the sink for hours. Number 19. Frijoles with salt pork. Down along the Texas border, Mexican vaqueros taught Anglo cowboys how to slow simmer pinto beans with a fat slab of salt pork until the broth turned nearly black and impossibly rich. They served it in tin cups with a corn tortilla folded on the side. A senior can do this in a single saucepan. It is simple. 1 cup dried beans, 1 small piece of salt pork or a thick bacon slice, water, salt, garlic, 2 hours on low. The whole meal costs about $1 and tastes like something a 4-star restaurant would charge $15 for. First pattern break. Here's where things get interesting. Number 18. Sourdough biscuit stew. Every chuck wagon carried a sourdough starter, and the cook guarded it like a child. When supper was thin, he would drop spoonfuls of sourdough biscuit dough straight into a bubbling pot of stew, where they would puff up into pillowy dumplings. Here's the wild part. Food historians at the University of Texas studied old chuck wagon journals and found that cowboys eating this exact meal walked an average of 20 miles a day on horseback and never lost weight. The combination of slow-cooked meat and sourdough biscuits created what modern nutritionists now call a complete protein and complex carbohydrate balance, the exact thing diet books charge you $40 to learn. For a senior, even a tube of refrigerated biscuits dropped into a simple beef stew works the same way. 1 pot, no measuring, no fuss, and a meal that holds you for hours. Number 17. Mulligan stew. Borrowed from hobos riding the same trails, it was the ultimate use-everything pot. Whatever the cook had, in it went. A potato, half an onion, a heel of bread, a chunk of mystery meat, water, and salt. Cowboys called it leftover heaven. For a senior cleaning out the crisper drawer once a week, this is the meal that pays for itself. There are no rules, no recipe, just 1 pot, 1 fire, and whatever needs using. Some of the best suppers ever made started exactly this way. Number 16. Cowboy cornbread skillet. Cornmeal traveled well, lasted forever, and turned into supper in 20 minutes. The trail cook would brown beef and onions in a cast iron skillet, pour cornbread batter right over the top, and bake the whole thing in the coals. 1 pan, 1 meal, 0 cleanup. For a senior, a small cast iron skillet and a box of Jiffy cornbread mix will reproduce this exactly. Brown half a pound of ground beef with an onion. Pour the cornbread batter over the top. Bake at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. The cornbread soaks up the meat juices on the bottom and turns into something you will dream about. I collected 100 of the best old-school meals into one cookbook. You can find it below. Number 15. Trail coffee beef. Cowboys discovered something cooks today are still rediscovering. Strong black coffee, the kind that's been sitting on the fire all morning, makes one of the best meat marinades on earth. Trail cooks poured leftover coffee into the stew pot to deepen flavor and tenderize tough cuts. The coffee's acidity slowly broke down the meat fibers. For seniors, this trick costs nothing. You already make coffee. Pour the last cup over a cheap chuck roast. Add an onion and some salt, then slow cook it. The coffee disappears completely. What's left is meat so tender you can cut it with a fork. Number 14. Chuck wagon chicken and dumplings. When the trail boss bagged a wild turkey or a couple of prairie chickens, the cook turned it into the meal cowboys begged for on Sunday nights. He would simmer the bird whole in a pot with onions, salt, and pepper, then drop in spoonfuls of biscuit dough at the very end. The dumplings cooked in the broth, soaking up all the chicken flavor. A senior today can do this with a single chicken thigh, water to cover, an onion, salt, and a few spoonfuls of Bisquick mixed with milk. 20 minutes, start to finish, one pot. The kind of meal that feels like someone is taking care of you even when you are cooking for yourself. Number 13. Whistleberry soup. That was the cowboy nickname for any soup made mostly of beans, and the joke writes itself. But the soup was no joke. Cooks would take leftover beans, mash half of them to thicken the broth, and add bacon, onion, and a splash of vinegar to brighten the whole thing. The vinegar was the key. It cut the heaviness and made the soup taste fresh instead of muddy. For a senior with half a can of beans left over, this is a 5-minute supper. Mash, simmer, add vinegar, eat. One bowl, one spoon, total cost about 60 cents. Number 12. Cowboy goulash. Hungarian immigrants working the Kansas trails brought their goulash recipes with them, and trail cooks adapted it fast. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, tomatoes, onion, and a heavy hand of paprika, all cooked together in one pot until the pasta was tender and the sauce was thick. Cowboys called it American chop suey, slumgullion, or just plain goulash, depending on which outfit you rode with. For a senior, this is the perfect one-pot supper. Brown the beef, add everything else, then simmer for 20 minutes. 3 meals out of one pot for under $5. Number 11. Prairie oysters and onions. All right, we are not going to dwell on what prairie oysters actually were, but the technique matters. Trail cooks would slice them thin, dredge them in cornmeal, and fry them up with mountains of caramelized onions in bacon grease. The cornmeal coating and the sweet onions could turn just about anything into a meal worth eating. For a senior today, take that same technique and apply it to chicken livers, which cost about $2 a pound. Dredge in cornmeal, fry in bacon fat with sliced onions, eat with toast. It is old-fashioned, it is iron-rich, and it is a complete supper out of one skillet. Second pattern, break. Controversy incoming. Number 10. Slumgullion. Now here is where food snobs get sniffy. Slumgullion was the cowboy word for any throw-it-together meat and pasta dish, and the academics today turn up their noses at it. Ground beef, canned tomatoes, an onion, whatever pasta was on the wagon, and a handful of cheese if the cook was feeling generous. They call it peasant food. They call it lazy. But here is what those food magazine writers do not tell you. A 2019 study in the Journal of Nutrition Education looked at one-pot pasta meals like slumgullion and found that seniors who ate them 3 times a week had better protein intake and lower grocery bills than seniors trying to follow fancy meal plans. The simple truth the food industry does not want you to know is this. A box of pasta costs $1. A pound of ground beef costs $4. A can of tomatoes costs $1. That is a week of supper for $6. Cookbooks and meal kit companies have spent billions convincing seniors that cooking has to be complicated. The cowboys knew better. One pot, one spoon, supper on the table in 20 minutes. Number 9. Pioneer pot pie. Long before frozen pot pies showed up in grocery freezers, trail cooks were making them right in a Dutch oven. They'd stew up meat and vegetables, then top the whole thing with a single sheet of biscuit dough or pie crust and bake it in the coals until the top turned golden. One vessel, one meal. For a senior, this is easier than it sounds. Stew leftover chicken or beef with frozen peas and carrots and a cup of broth. Top with a refrigerated pie crust and bake at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. The whole thing comes out of one pot. No casserole dish, no extra pan, no headache. Number 8. Ranch hand, beef and rice. Spanish vaqueros taught the cowboys this one. Brown rice is toasted in bacon fat until it smells toasty. Then you add beef chunks, onion, garlic, diced tomato, and water, and let the whole thing simmer until the rice has absorbed every drop. The result is a one-pot meal so flavorful that nothing else is needed on the plate. For a senior, this is a complete supper for about $2. Use half a cup of rice, a quarter pound of beef, an onion, and a small can of diced tomatoes. 20 minutes. The rice does the work. You just wait. Number 7. Dutch oven beef and cabbage. Cabbage could be kept for weeks on the chuck wagon without spoiling, which made it the cowboy's favorite green vegetable. Trail cooks would layer cabbage with browned beef, onions, and potatoes in a Dutch oven, pour in a cup of water, and let the whole thing steam together for an hour. The cabbage turned sweet, the beef turned tender, and everything tasted like everything else in the best way. For a senior, this is a winter supper that costs maybe $3 and feeds you for 2 days. Half a head of cabbage, half a pound of beef, an onion, a potato. One pot, low heat, walk away. Number 6. Sow belly and beans. Sow belly was the cowboy name for salt-cured pork belly, basically uncured bacon. Cooks rendered it slow, then added beans, water, and onion, and let it bubble all afternoon. The smoky pork fat infused every single bean with flavor. For a senior, modern thick-cut bacon does the exact same job. Render 4 slices in a pot, add a can of drained pinto beans, a chopped onion, and 1 cup of water. Simmer 20 minutes. That is a complete supper for under $2, and it tastes like it took all day. Number 5. Cookhouse stew with wild greens. Trail cooks foraged whatever they could find, wild onions, dandelion greens, lamb's quarters, and tossed them into the supper pot to stretch the meal. Modern nutritionists are now writing books about the benefits of bitter greens for seniors, the exact same greens cowboys ate for free. For a senior today, a bag of frozen kale or spinach does the same trick. Add a handful to any stew in the last 5 minutes. Iron, vitamins, fiber, and flavor, all from one pot. Third, pattern break. Number 4, chuck wagon chili mac. This is the meal that food companies stole and put in a box, but the original was 100 times better. Trail cooks would make a pot of chili, then add elbow macaroni right to the pot in the last 15 minutes, letting the pasta cook in the chili broth. The starch from the pasta thickened the chili, and the chili flavored every noodle. One pot, one meal, no draining, no second saucepan. For a senior, this is a meal that beats anything in the freezer aisle. Half a pound of beef, a can of beans, a can of tomatoes, a tablespoon of chili powder, a cup of dry elbow macaroni. 25 minutes, 3 suppers from one pot. And here is the thing the boxed mix companies do not want you to know. A box of Hamburger Helper costs $3 and is mostly powder. The real cowboy version costs less, tastes better, and does not have a list of ingredients you cannot pronounce. We forgot how to do this, and food companies have made fortunes off our forgetting. Number 3, cowboy stew with hardtack. This was the supper so filling that one bowl could carry a man through a blizzard. Trail cooks took whatever meat they had, added beans, potatoes, onions, and water, and simmered it for hours. Then they crumbled hard biscuits called hardtack right into the bowl to soak up the broth and add bulk. The combination of slow-cooked beef, beans, starch, and bread created what we would now call a perfect macronutrient meal. For a senior, the modern version is even simple. Make a basic beef and vegetable stew, then crumble a few saltines or a heel of stale bread right into your bowl. The bread soaks up the broth and turns the supper into something so filling you will not need a second bowl. This is the meal that fed men who worked 16 hours in sub-zero weather. It will certainly handle a quiet evening at home. Number 2, one-pot Cowboy. Breakfast for supper. Out on the trail, breakfast and supper often looked exactly the same. A cast iron skillet with bacon, potatoes, onions, and eggs all cooked together in one pan. The bacon rendered first, the potatoes crisped in the bacon fat, the onions caramelized, and the eggs went in last. One skillet, no plates needed if you did not feel like dirtying any. For a senior cooking for one, this is the perfect lazy supper. 2 strips of bacon, 1 diced potato, half an onion, and 2 eggs. 10 minutes from start to finish. Costs about $1.50. And there is something deeply satisfying about eating breakfast for supper, the same way the cowboys did after a long day when you just do not feel like making something complicated. And finally, in first place, number 1, Texas Trail Stew. This is the king of cowboy one-pot meals, the dish every chuck wagon cook from the Rio Grande to the Canadian border knew by heart. Beef chunks, browned in bacon fat, then onions, garlic, potatoes, carrots, beans, tomatoes, and a heavy hand of chili powder, all simmered together in one big Dutch oven until the meat fell apart and the broth turned thick and dark. The cowboys called it everything stew because it had everything in it. One pot, one fire, one spoon, a meal that fed a dozen hungry men with leftovers for breakfast. For a senior living alone, this is the meal worth remembering above all others. Put everything in your fridge that needs using into one pot. Brown the meat first, add the vegetables, cover with water or broth, season generously, and let it simmer for an hour while you do something else. What comes out is 3 or 4 suppers from one cooking session, each one tasting better than the last as the flavors deepen in the fridge. No special equipment, no fancy ingredients, no sink full of dishes. Just the same simple wisdom that fed America's cowboys for 100 years. The trail torch cooks knew something we forgot. A meal does not need to be complicated to be good. It needs to be hot and filling and made with care, even if the only person you are cooking for is yourself. I collected 100 of the best old-school meals into one cookbook. You can find it below. So there it is. 25 forgotten cowboy one-pot meals, every one of them designed for exactly the situation a lot of seniors find themselves in today. Cooking alone, watching the budget, saving energy. Pick one this week, just one. Try the cowboy beans or the chili mac or the breakfast for supper. Then come back and tell me in the comments which one you made and how it turned out. If your grandfather rode the range, or if your grandmother cooked for ranch hands, share her story too. These recipes were never meant to be forgotten, and now that you know them, they don't have to be. Don't forget to subscribe.